We're going to talk a little bit about a unique project that we're doing with the Georgia Tech Supply Chain Logistics Institute, and we're doing this with Richard's team at Competitive Insights. And it's got an interesting set of connections to the overall theme of the conference. And so we look forward to discussing it with you. We do have time for dialogue, but what Richard suggested is, in this case, he would be comfortable with you interrupting him during his discussion if you've got questions, as well as at the end. So don't be bashful. I do know I was on the left side. We lost this morning, and this side won all of the matches. So maybe this afternoon we can step up on the left-hand side. So we'll see. Okay. So I'm going to introduce myself. I rejoined Georgia Tech in January of this year as the managing director of the Supply Chain and Logistics Institute. It's scary when I counted, and I said after a 40-year absence. So there are very few people who get to come back after 40 years, but I consider it a blessing after a career in industry, mostly in fast-moving consumer goods, supply chains with the original depth in logistics, and a big chunk of that with Coca-Cola. So I was not far from the campus, and a fair amount of ongoing engagement with Georgia Tech. But I'm really excited to come back and play a role at the Supply Chain and Logistics Institute. And it's an interesting construct that didn't exist when I went to Georgia Tech, but the concept of interdisciplinary research is something that's become much more prevalent in the last 15 or 20 years. So a lot of my role is to foster those connections with what we call our larger supply chain and logistics ecosystem, which is effectively worldwide. But there's a lot going on in and around and across our campus where we do work and have opportunities to do more work on behalf of advancing the field of supply chain and logistics. So lots of good stuff. One of the things that I think people don't realize is that we do a fair amount of work that's intended for education beyond a traditional university setting. We do a lot of work in supporting what we call continuing education. We have strong advocacy that as the field of supply chain has changed, the kind of the mandate for ongoing education is so critical. We've seen that theme around upskilling and reskilling as a global challenge. And so we play a role in that space and desire to play a bigger role in that space. We actually, interestingly enough, at the Georgia Tech Savannah campus, you saw Jimmy here last week. They're kicking off either this week or next week a massive focus on summer camps for students in the high school area to introduce them to the field of supply chain. I think it's over 1,000 over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks or so. So some interesting things that you wouldn't expect we'd be involved in. Another interesting thing that we're involved in, there's part of a very large program in the state of Georgia. We got some significant funding from the folks in Washington, and it's a massive grant to help the state of Georgia advance the capabilities in manufacturing, and we do say logistics alongside of this. We have a huge influx of new manufacturing in the state of Georgia, and there's a huge opportunity to support the growth of those businesses, both large and small. And a big theme of that for us is really bringing more progressive thinking and including applied AI and supply chain resilience for those businesses that have a need, which is essentially everyone. So we have a role in that specific in our team, and that's really about supporting the resilience, in particular of our rural supply chains. There's another intentional element of this work. If you understand the state of Georgia, most people know Atlanta and not much beyond. One of the reasons we wanted to come to Savannah is because there's also a massive amount of growth and development in the city in Savannah and the surrounding part of the state. But there's a desire for us to support the broader economic development of the rural parts of the state of Georgia. Many of them have not had large-scale industry for the last 50, 60, 70 years, and there's a significant tangible effort and now result in terms of bringing that to those communities. But they have needs. In many cases, we have big businesses, but they're followed by supply base. And in many cases, those supply bases are smaller businesses. So part of what we're trying to do with this Georgia AIM grant is to be able to support those parts of the ecosystem in the state of Georgia that are benefiting from growth but need new capabilities. We have some particular areas that are geographic, and we have some particular industry focus. So we're clearly trying to work with Savannah and the port ecosystem. We still have a very big agricultural ecosystem in the state of Georgia and the Northeast. It's proteins. You see the chicken up there. We do have a fair amount of agriculture in the southern part of the state as well. In Dalton, we've got a huge floor covering business with a number of large manufacturers. So a lot going on in that space. And again, what we're trying to do is interact with those businesses in a variety of different ways, whether it be training, whether it be projects, whether it would be pilots, and we're going to talk about a pilot today. So this is the specific project that we've done with Richard's team, and the goal here is this is a multi-year effort that's intended to turn into an evergreen effort. So part of what we're trying to do in spotlighting both the need and the practical application is to create some pilots, and Richard and his team were an early player with us in terms of the idea of a pilot. And as we talk about artificial intelligence, for people who are not close to it, they're like, I read about it, I don't understand what it means. And so how do we make it tangible, particularly for business people to drive better decision making? And that's the focus of the discussion for today. So with that, I'm going to bring up my dear friend Richard Sharpe. Richard and I have known each other for untold years, and fortunate to have the opportunity to continue working with him.
Thank you, Chris. So, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here today to present as part of this session. I've learned a lot. I wasn't exactly sure, what I was going to learn, and it's really been a great use of my time, and just appreciate being here. One of the things I wanted to suggest that offer a little bit more information that you may not be aware of is an organization called the American Logistics Aid Network, ALAN. And if you want more information, it's www.alanaid.org. The reason I'm bringing it up is, does anyone remember Hurricane Katrina? Sure. Disaster, right? I mean, it was just absolutely devastating. As a supply chain industry, as we looked at the response effort in this country for Hurricane Katrina, we knew as a supply chain industry that there had to be a better way. And if you study the problem at all, the issue was that everybody wanted to help. So, organizations, synagogues, churches, community centers said that they must need blankets, and they must need water, and they must need clothes. And so they gathered all of that and sent it to the New Orleans area. Well, what happened was it didn't go, first of all, people didn't know it existed, no visibility. Second, it started getting stockpiled in places where nobody knew where it was, and it just sat there, and then 2 miles down the road, people had the needs and they didn't even know the material was there. So it's very much a push system as opposed to an efficient pull system. So ALAN was created by supply chain professionals to help address that issue, and we've been in existence ever since Hurricane Katrina. So it's something the supply chain industry should be very proud of, and if you'd like to participate in it, there are many different ways that you can do that, but I encourage you again to look at www.alanaid.org. All right. So, as Chris mentioned, I am the CEO of Competitive Insights. We are a SaaS platform. This is the only slide you're going to see on CI, so I promise the commercial will be very small. We focus on helping people get very specific and very actionable information associated with the cost and the profit for every item, every SKU, being sold to every customer through every channel. So visibility from the start of wherever the product is made anywhere in the world, and looking at capturing every transaction, Excel spreadsheets, TMS systems, WMS systems, doesn't matter, and capturing every transaction for every product as it moves to be able to come up with information that is helpful for organizations to make decisions around portfolio management, customer management, looking at inventory, supply chain risk, and we'll cover a little of that. But the idea is that if the information that you're going to present on any of those areas is not trusted and it's not repeatable, you're wasting your time. So we're focused on that, and I'll give you a little bit more on that in just a little bit. But I'm here to represent Brian Green and HMTX. Brian couldn't be here today. He had a previous engagement that he could not change. But Brian has been a pleasure to work with. Brian is a pragmatic supply chain problem solver. It's the best way to describe him. Georgia Tech graduate, but he is absolutely focused on taking technology and thinking through practical applications in actually solving problems for HMTX, problems that all of us have seen in our careers, if you will. So a little bit about HMTX. If you know the flooring industry, HMTX is a major player. And what they're basically doing is they're contracting manufacturing in various parts of the world, primarily China. And they're moving those products into the U.S. to serve multiple markets. It's a very fast-growing market, and HMTX, it's a pleasure to work with because they are absolutely focused on getting better and better at how to run that company and be profitable for their shareholders, as well as obviously service their customers. So they have operations all over the world, but they're primarily focused in North America. They have multiple segments, big box retailers, flooring distributors, as well as commercial markets. So as you can see, different operations in different parts of the world. And the one we're going to talk about is one of their primary industries, or one of their primary markets, and that is for residential and light commercial customers. And the actual area is called, or division is called Halstead. So we're going to focus on the problems and the opportunities that were represented by Halstead and how the HMTX team came together with Competitive Insights to actually look for opportunities to reduce costs, improve profitability, and better serve their customers. So far, so good. Everybody cool with what we're covering? And I do encourage questions. If something is being said, please stop me and ask. So as I said before, the industry is growing, and they wanted to be sure that they were doing really smart things about taking their market share. Brian was really very clever. He decided that in order to actually address the issues that he was focused on, he needed to form the dream team. And the dream team was Brian, head of supply chain organization, and his CFO, John Hinkle. And John and Brian went after the initiative of understanding how they could make better decisions in managing that growth, specifically around their portfolio management. So as you all know, companies look at the products they're selling, the products they're planned to be selling, and they want to ask the question, are we doing smart things? Are these products making money? Are they part of a portfolio that the customers want? Are they losing money? And is there something we can do about that, either in changing something about the dynamics of the product, or are we just basically going to need to change the portfolio and remove a product and be able to move something in that will actually perform better? So they were really smart to recognize that that was a question they needed to answer, not as a project, but as an ongoing capability for the company. So what we'd like to do is represent back, of course, with Georgia Tech and what Chris was mentioning. How did we take the collaboration with Georgia Tech and be able to think about creating considerations for artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually make a practical difference for HMTX and for other companies as well? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly represent things that we've seen over time for your consideration, and then we're going to talk about how we applied those to HMTX. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, good. So there's a lot of great work being done in AI, as we all know, and many of you are involved with that work. But there's also, I think everyone agree, there's a lot of hype in the market around AI. And people are somewhat confused by it and maybe disillusioned by it a little bit. So these are the lessons we've learned in applying AI and ML to the problems that we help solve. And the first one is having a very intentional focus. So we don't want to be all things to all people. We want to be very laser focused on specific issues, specific problems, and solve those using AI and ML. So everyone knows the supply chain. I don't have to go into any detail with this group. But what we're, in a very generic way, what we're doing is we're looking at everywhere a product is made, anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter. All the ways that that product can traverse through that network, which might be air, maybe rail, a lot of discussion yesterday on intermodal. It might be truck, but the ways the products move from the source into the market that it's actually going to be sold. And so that can obviously go through different ports. It can go through consolidation centers. It can go to local warehouses. And then ultimately what you want is to get it to the customer in the right time, not damaged, right place, et cetera, et cetera. So the typical supply chain, right? Everybody's, it's 101. But when you're talking about actually getting visibility that's at that very specific level, you've got to consider all of the costs associated with moving every product. So those costs can be around the sourcing of a particular SKU, or the way the transportation is being handled and moving it, any export, import, processing, tariffs, duties, demurrage costs, being able to look at other sourcing costs. If the product moves back and forth between facilities, actually it gets to that final location where it's going to be stored and then actually delivered to the customer. So this is looking at all the costs and being able to capture every transaction that's associated with doing that. Now, for a typical company, what we're talking about is 4 billion transactions, the power of AI. Yes, sir?
Fixed cost part of this?
Fixed costs can be part of this, absolutely. It depends. The cost structures that we model to help a company with this are defined by the company. So if they want to include SG&A, they want to include fixed costs, most of the time companies are going to focus on the costs that they can change that are directly attributable to a product or servicing a customer. So a good example of that is typically when you're thinking about cost structures you can change, you're not going to close your headquarters building because one product isn't profitable, right? So it's easier because then you can make decisions that have an immediate impact because you know exactly what it is that's causing the behavior that you don't want to have happen. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions so far? Okay, so that's a lot of data, 4 billion transactions. Think about that being processed every month so that, in fact, you can have the kind of information that we're going to be talking about, and you need to do it very quickly. So the power of AI allows us to capture all that information. We're gathering it during the month, Excel spreadsheets, etc. And then we actually go through a process you'll see where we turn it into trusted, validated information, and then the analytics that are required to actually solve a problem. So to give you some sense of the power of AI, by the time we've received all of that native data and we say, let's go with refresh, we can refresh the data, we can do the validation required for the data, we can actually do the transformation of the data into cost and profit, and we can do the republication of all the analytics in 5 days or less. Power of AI. All right, so, but it's just not cost. Let's keep going. What about the revenue side? So how does a product actually, the discounts, the promotions, ways that revenues are actually reduced to be able to, sell it to a customer? And if you have that at the SKU level, and it's also trusted information, and you combine that information together, you get net landed profit, what we call NLP. So the net landed profit associated with, as I said earlier, every product going to every customer location through every channel on an accurate and repeatable basis. Make sense? Yes? Yes.
It means that there is a one centralized office. For example, they are managing all discounts, prices, because in the usual supply chain, we have different levels in the supply chain. And maybe they don't want to collaborate together.
Yes, that's an excellent question. They don't want to collaborate together.
Yes, and how you are claiming you can do that for the whole supply chain, because in the real world, supply chain parts are totally fragmented, and we
Yes.
have the problem for their collaboration, information sharing, making trust. How did you handle that?
It's a wonderful question. We're actually going to get into that in just a moment. But the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize that all those functions you just mentioned, they all have different sources of data, right? So the sales team has information, et cetera, et cetera. So what you need to do is you need to be able to find a way for that company specifically how to tie that information together. So there's a methodology for doing that. And then you have to, once you have gotten it all together, then you've got to be sure that everybody in the company, the salespeople, finance people, supply chain people, agree that the sources that you used are right, and that the way you're going to transform it is right, so that they trust it. So that gets to the point of having one version of the truth, if you will. But what's the common linchpin that people will want to actually think about using this? Think about it. If you're a for-profit organization, what do you care about? Making money, right? So if you can say to them, you can't argue about the data, it's all been validated through this process, and the information you're seeing is correct, you might actually increase the cost for one particular product, because in the end, it's going to make you more money. But if you tie it back to profitability, the senior level of leadership of the company is going to get real interested real quick. And that's how you facilitate the change management issues, which is the heart of your question. Does that help? Anything else? Okay, let's keep going. So, exactly to your question. So what do we have in a typical company? We have functional silos, if you will. Sales is very interested in revenue, increasing revenue. Supply chain is all around efficiency and cost reduction. Finance wants to be sure their shareholders are really happy, right? And you look at marketing, and they're looking at, the actual amount of market share that they're getting in their particular industry. And this is the way companies work today. What we want to do is we want to bring that collaboration together. And so what that means is having that ability to give people back the information they need to run each of their groups, but that it's unified and that it's trusted and it's across that entire end-to-end supply chain, to your question. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the first consideration, is being able to know what you're trying to solve with AI. The second one is, to the exact point, you've got to trust the data, right? You're talking about 4 billion transactions. So trusting that data is very important to get to that very specific type of information, but it has to be done in such a way that it's fast and that it's repeatable. So we have the typical situation for most companies. You have your SAPs, your Oracles, so the ERPs, your transportation, your warehousing, and point of sale, Excel spreadsheets, et cetera, et cetera. And these are data silos. I mean, everyone knows they exist, and they exist in every company. And what you want to be able to do is bring that together, because really, the truth of the matter is, empowerment of AI, the Achilles heel for that is siloed data and siloed functions. And if you can pull that together to get to that trusted, accurate, et cetera, then you have the ability to do something really significant, something really meaningful for the company. So let's keep going. So one way that we address that issue is that we actually collect all that data continuously. and we know who we're getting the data from. And then we go through a process of bringing it together to use machine learning to look for patterns in the data, problems, missing data, files that make no sense, et cetera, et cetera. And we republish back summary information every month, not to the users of the system, but to the subject matter experts who know the data. So the transportation person who knows that rail movement, or who knows those truckload movements, et cetera, we publish to them the summary information of what we've seen and make sure they validate that information before we republish. And we do that. We will not republish the analytics until every SME has checked off that the information is right. Amazingly, after a little bit of time doing it, it takes them about 3 or 4 hours because they can slice and dice it pretty much any way they want. Okay, so another consideration for AI adoption is being able to give results. Obviously, that's why people want it. They want to be able to do things that they weren't able to do before, and they want to do it very quickly. So let's talk about that. If you're very familiar with a profit and loss statement, typical companies, they're a wonderful tool. They help you really understand the things associated with the overall financial performance of the company. However, if you're familiar with them, do you think that you can get down to the performance of the color of a particular shirt that you're selling through a retailer using a P&L? Todd, can you do that? No. You can't, because the P&L's function is to give an overall performance review of the financials for the company. It's not designed to give you accurate and specific information down to that SKU customer level. So for the purposes of financial reporting, it's wonderful. For the purposes of getting down to actionable strategies to reduce costs, improve profitability, it doesn't work. If you do use it for that, what you're using are allocations. You take all the transportation costs that went from Chicago to Atlanta, and you say, okay, well, our biggest customer is Atlanta, is 50% of our revenue, so we're going to give them 50% of the transportation costs. That's how people do it, and it's not very accurate. What you want to do is, again, as a consideration, is you want to take that information and move it to something that is very meaningful for the organization to make very specific decisions that support the strategies for the company. And we're going to go into more detail on that in a minute. So, as a backdrop, does that make sense? Everybody cool? No questions? All right, let's move right into how did HMTX take advantage of all this? Intentional focus. Now remember, they're sourcing product in China and other places. They're bringing it in different ways. They're going through different ports. They're paying all the costs associated with that. They're taking it into their consolidation centers. They're doing value-added services to the products. They're servicing multiple markets with those products. And they're finally, obviously reporting back to their shareholders exactly how well it's working. But as I mentioned before, that world is changing. The industry is growing, and the question is, are we doing smart things as we're offering these products, or could we do things smarter to be able to think about our portfolio? Primary question. So, this looks like a P&L to you, I would imagine, and it is designed to look like one. But what is different about it, to the question you raised earlier, every line item of cost that you see here, right, is defined by the customer. It's not cookie cutter. So they say, HMTX said, we want to be able to understand the breakdown on COGS, the cost of goods, and these are the elements that are really important to us. We want to be able to understand factory discounts, which is a part of the industry, tariffs, license fees, you can see the line items. These are line items that we want to get specific visibility to. And these are the discounts that we give our customers in order to sell our products. Now, if this is another company, these line items may be completely different. It doesn't matter. It's what is important to them. But what you want is the ability to have that and then be able to, using AI, filter that around, I want to look at the Southeast region. I want to look at only one company, one customer, et cetera, et cetera. But what is really important and always eye-opening for every customer is look at, you got a standard profit margin, all right? That's the margin that they have operated under. Our standard margin, which is usually the cost of goods, possibly other costs, looking at their net revenue, and it comes up with, here's the margin that we're declaring to our shareholders. That's a great start. But when you get down to this guy, net landed margin, it's not unusual for that to be significantly lower than their standard margin. Significantly. And you're going to be surprised for HMTX what they discovered. But that is not unusual. HMTX is very typical as far as the results go. All right, so there you go. Imagine walking into your boardroom and saying, you know what? We have a new tool that's allowing us not to allocate costs, but actually define the actual costs for every item and the impact that it has on our true net landed profit margin versus what you're usually seeing on our standard margin is 9.64%. For a $700 million company. Can you see that scenario? And the kinds of conversations that would drive? It's fascinating. The power of AI and ML. And since Brian can't be here with us today, we asked him to comment, and you'll see his comments throughout, on what they are thinking at HMTX with regard to that type of capability. So far, so good? Okay, let's keep going. So repeatable data integrity. So now we've got all those products moving from China. They're going into different ways to service their different channels. How did they actually think about data integrity? And so just as I mentioned before, the way that their particular data is coming to us and the way it needs to be validated and unified and then ultimately verified for their SMEs allows them to be able to have Brian say this. Let you take a look at his quote. Okay, let's keep going. So what were the results? This is where it gets kind of fun. So what are the things that I can learn that I didn't know before? All right, so let's start with the whale curve. Everybody familiar with the whale curve? The ongoing performance. So here we go. Basically, if you look at it, here is the amount of profit that I'm making over the course of my multiple products. So as you can see, once I get up to this line right here, and the products that constitute that profitability, the profit becomes really almost flat. But look at how much red is here. Now my profit starts dropping. And so I've got a lot of unprofitable activity. Now imagine this. Think about knowing that and trusting that. And knowing that, I'm just going to use a number for example purposes, 35% of all of your costs are being spent on unprofitable products and customers. 35%. That is not an atypical number. In some cases, it can be higher. Would that change the way you're thinking? Of course it would. So the bottom line is that we have a law of diminishing returns, if you will. Let's get a little more specific. See these little bars? These little green guys are the number of SKUs, the number of products that are giving HMTX 80% of their profit. 80%. This guy is very marginal. This guy represents all the unprofitable products. Look at this. Top 96% of all their profit is coming from that level of SKU activity. And guess what? Most of their SKUs are unprofitable. Pretty amazing, huh? All right, let's keep going. This is fun. As I mentioned before, they're looking at their product portfolio, right? They're trying to say, are we selling the right things? Can we do changes? How do we continue to capture market share? And they have already started making decisions about products that they're no longer going to sell. One of the products that was being transitioned out of their portfolio is the 5th largest contributor of net landed profit. Without this type of visibility, how would you know? You wouldn't. Very interesting. Let's keep going. One of their best revenue items, the one that is number one in revenue, the one that the salespeople love, the one that they always count and say, look how well we're doing. The 5th worst performance product. Now this isn't made up. These are real factual numbers that HMTX allowed us to share with you. Okay. So basically what Brian, as I said before, is very much a pragmatic supply chain problem solver. And with their CFO, John Hinkle, they are now moving into a whole new direction of product decisions around what and how they should be managing the enterprise cross-functionally, from a sales perspective, from a marketing perspective, from a supply chain perspective, because they have the opportunity to actually use AI and ML in a way that is going to be continuously providing information to make smarter strategies. So, I love this quote from Brian. You know, he kind of ties this to blockchain, and people are still trying to figure out blockchain. And he said, well, I'm not going to talk about blockchain today, but I am going to talk about AI. And this is the quote he offered, which I promise you will be using a lot because it's a very good quote and it's very appropriate, I think. But it gets back to having HMTX have the right information on a monthly basis that's trusted, accurate, specific, and repeatable so that they can take actions to continue to capture market share and be efficient and be able to serve their stakeholders and their shareholders, in a better way.